Recently, a few of my commenters have wanted to draw our attention to the upcoming crisis of our generation, namely blackouts caused by charging EVs. The grid is going to melt, they say. It simply cannot handle it. That sounds pretty serious, doesn't it? Maybe we shouldn't all switch to EVs for fear of plunging the country back into the dark ages, making people go without electricity, all because people want EVs. Well, what do you think? Should we investigate these claims, see if there is any merit to them? I think that might be a plan. Stick with me, let's do just that. Hello everyone, I'm Andrew. Thanks for joining me on the electric transition. Today the name of the channel couldn't be more appropriate. This is about the transition and what happens to the grid because of it. The issue, commenters have pointed out, is that the UK's electricity grid has limited capacity and that all these EVs charging is going to cause it to go into meltdown. It's a shame that nobody has thought of that. Well, my guess is that they have checked, but sure, maybe they haven't. I wish people in important roles understood as much as my viewers. I suppose we could check though, couldn't we? We could have a look at the data and mark NESO's homework, so to speak. Before I start, I'll point out that the links to all of the information sources are in the video description as usual. That way you can check for yourself if you like. Let's start by looking at the UK demand data for 2025. That's available from Elexon Insights, who publish energy statistics, particularly electricity statistics. The data available from their portal is almost as live. It gives us a breakdown of electricity used in each settlement period. That's the half-hourly periods in the day used to control payments for electricity generation in the UK. Using their website, I exported the data for the whole of 2025 and used a spreadsheet to analyse it. This graph shows the average usage for each settlement period across the whole year. Each bar shows the average power during that half-hour period. This graph shows us what is called the duck curve, a name given to the rising and falling nature of electricity across the day. Someone thought this looked like a duck. Just to explain, settlement period 1 starts at midnight and settlement period 2 half an hour later. So what we can see here is an average day with demand low at night and higher in the day. This sort of curve is seen in most countries, although when peak demand moves by territory. In the UK, peak demand is on a winter's evening when we all cook and heat our homes after getting in from school or work. In Australia, on the other hand, the peak falls in the middle of a summer's day because of their need for air conditioning that far south. However, whilst I wanted to show you this graph, I'm not going to use averages in the calculations. What matters to people worried about blackouts is peak demand, the worst case scenarios. That's what this graph shows. Note that this is a Franken day. It's not any real single day, but the worst of each settlement period at any point in the year of 2025. This graph is somewhat similar to the other one. It does show rise and fall, but the day is much flatter, showing less variation in that period. However, it still shows that the night is when demand is low. From about 11 PM to 6 AM, there is a reduction in the amount of electricity in use. That shows there is spare capacity when electricity is available for us to use. This is what we consider off-peak, and electricity suppliers are able to make electricity cheaper in this period, so that is when EVs normally get charged. If we focus on this off-peak period, usage is highest in settlement period 47, namely at 11 PM, and we are using 32.9 gigawatts for that half-hour period. Meanwhile, if we focus on the peak period, usage is at its very highest in period 35, between 5:30 and 6 PM, and usage at that point is 46.6 gigawatts. The difference between those two is power that we can use. That's what we've got available for charging. At least that. This is our worst case. So this is the amount we need to check is enough. How do we do that? Well, we need to know how much we need per car. Gov.uk publishes useful figures on vehicle usage. The data is somewhat delayed. We only have data for 2024 at the moment, but that shows that EVs did an average of 8,900 miles per year in 2024. So that's a start. But that's per year, and working per week might be easier for us to comprehend. Divide that figure by 52 and we find the average EV does just 171 miles per week. Not all that much. We need to recharge in order to be able to do that much each week for our car to fulfill its needs. If we estimate that the average efficiency of an EV is 3 miles per kilowatt hour, which is intentionally a low average, then we can work out how much energy each car needs per week. Allowing for 10% charging losses, that works out to be 63 kilowatt hours we pull from the grid per car on average. Some will do more than that, of course, but some will do less. This figure seems to make sense. By the way, I'm ignoring public charging during the day for this check. We'll assume we need that all at night. Okay, so we know that we need to pull 63 kilowatt hours per car from the grid each week, and we know that, worst case, we have a headroom of 13.6 gigawatts. That's the difference between peak use in period 35 and the use in period 47. We have at least that much for 7 hours, for 7 days a week, so the available energy for charging is 670,000 megawatt hours, or 670 million kilowatt hours minimum each week. Right, so now we know how much energy we have at a minimum, and we know how much we need per car. If we divide one by the other, we can see that we have enough to support about 10.5 million EVs, worst case. Is that enough? Well, yes and no. Last week I showed a model of how EVs grow in the coming years. It's not as fast as you might think. Here is the table of growth over time, with these numbers showing the total number of EVs on the road at the end of the year shown. And here is that data in a chart, by the way, which people asked to see last time around. Pause the video if you want to look at that in more detail. What we can see is that we crossed 10.5 million cars in 2033. In fact, we are already charging 1.2 million cars at the start of 2025 when our grid data starts, so it's a little later than that, but it's there or thereabouts. So, does this show that the naysayers are right? We seem to run out of grid capacity in less than 10 years. They seem to be onto something. Since the fleet is expected to reach 40 million cars or so, we might have a problem. But maybe, instead, we've missed something. Let's zoom out and look at electricity usage for more than 1 year. If we use government data from DESNZ to look at the history of electricity usage, we can see that recent years have been unusual. You see, we're not currently using the grid at capacity. The top red line on this graph is maximum available supply, but it's not ever been used. The lower blue line shows that electricity usage, seen here as the largest amount of power we've used each year, the peak power usage, peaked in 2005 and has fallen since. That's happened for a couple of reasons. One is that some of our industry has moved, been outsourced if you will, but the other is energy efficiency. Work by the UK as part of the EU resulted in the switch to LED lighting, as well as the reduction of the power intensity of our appliances, such as fridges, washing machines and vacuum cleaners. Think of all those Energy Star certificates we see now. That has all resulted in 2 decades of dwindling demand, a reduction in our peak power usage. We aren't really troubling the grid itself at the moment. Now, there has also been a reduction in available supply, as we didn't need quite as much. But what we're talking about today is the grid and what it can transport. The grid hasn't changed much since 2005. It hasn't needed to as demand fell, so it's still capable of delivering what it did in 2005. What it can transport was proven back then. So, in our initial calculation, we used the wrong figure for the ceiling, the maximum power that the grid can deliver. We should instead use the figure from 2005, 61.6 gigawatts, not the 46.6 we used before. So if we redo our calculations using that figure, we can see that we have 28.7 gigawatts of headroom at least, and suddenly we can power 22 million cars. Looking back at our prediction of the number of EVs on the road, we can see that supply for 22 million cars takes us to the end of 2041. 15 years of EV growth at the speed required by the UK's ZEV mandate before we have any grid limitations. Now, of course, in reality, things are a bit more complicated than that. EVs are not the only source of growth in demand on the grid in the next 15 years. There's plenty of other stuff going on at the same time, as well as electrifying transportation, and all transportation, of course, including things other than cars. We are also going to be electrifying heating and industry. So some upgrades to the grid will be required by then, but the point is that there is no imminent threat. The grid can cope fine if the supply is there. And supply is currently growing. In January, we learnt the outcome of the Contracts for Difference Allocation Round 7, or AR7 as it's known in short, an award of contracts for additional renewable generation capacity. In this latest allocation round, contracts were awarded for 8.4 gigawatts of new offshore wind capacity. If you remember, peak electricity demand in 2025 was about 47 gigawatts. So these awards bring a 17% increase in available generation, intended to be online by about 2031. These allocation rounds are an annual event at the moment, so the outcome of the next one is just 10 months away as well. That's not to mention the delivery of supply from previous allocation rounds, with some of those projects only just coming online this year. So supply is being delivered bit by bit, and given enough storage, which is also coming online all of the time, the amount of energy available is ever increasing. Remember too that gas-fired power plants are not being closed. The gas fleet is intended to be our backup plan in case of periods of low renewables generation, at least for the time being. So all in all, I think we can say that we have plans for supply. But what about the grid? What will happen to that? Well, that's what the Great Grid Upgrade is all about. National Grid explains on their website that they understand that electricity use will grow and are undertaking a number of significant grid upgrades intended to allow new renewable generation to get where the demand is. Renewables are not all generated in the centre of the country, such as in the Midlands, where the traditional coal and gas generators tended to be situated, originally close to coal mines. Therefore, we do need to make some changes to the central transmission network to get power to where it's needed, upgrades to the backbone of the transmission system. But that's all ongoing, no problem there. The only bit that's left then is the local power grids, maintained and operated by the DNOs, to make sure that power can get to our homes and businesses. But that too comes as no surprise. The DNOs, or distribution network operators, manage the 13 separate distribution networks in the UK. They are aware of their responsibilities and are busy with lots of upgrade projects. Because there are so many DNO areas, each of which have so many upgrade projects on the go, we can't really cover those in this video in any detail, but here we are seeing just a few to give a flavour of the ongoing works. Suffice it to say that there are plenty of upgrades going on to our electricity network, most of which we probably haven't even noticed yet. But the fact that we haven't noticed them does not mean they aren't happening. In summary, there is no imminent threat of blackouts in the UK. Anyone who says so is either very uninformed and simply unaware of the headroom we have in the system, or are intentionally trying to frighten you. Electricity usage peaked back in 2005 at 61 gigawatts, so we know that the grid is capable of delivering that at least. And in 2025, usage peaked at 47 gigawatts, 14 gigawatts lower than that peak. As we discussed last time out, the growth in EVs is pretty slow. Because cars last a long time, combustion engine cars will still be around as late as 2050 and beyond. The growth of EVs as a proportion of the total car fleet is diluted by combustion engine cars for several more decades. So this sudden, huge spike in energy usage that scaremongers predict is simply not realistic. The growth curve instead shows a fairly steady adoption rate simply because cars last so long. The numbers I've shown today demonstrate how the low grid use at night gives us lots of room for manoeuvre with charging. We can handle 10 to 15 years of EV uptake with the existing infrastructure. We know that because the system used to handle significantly more energy than it does at the moment. Meanwhile, the great grid upgrade is bolstering the capability of the transmission network, the high voltage grid backbone that moves electricity long distances. That is all being enhanced at the moment. Supply is also being ramped up, with annual allocation rounds granting contracts for new renewable projects, as well as the extension of contracts for existing gas generators, so that we have those as a backup, used only as needed. Meanwhile, the distribution network operators are upgrading their local distribution networks as well, those parts that connect to our homes and businesses, with each area having multiple upgrade projects on the go at the moment. And we haven't even mentioned that people can charge their cars with their own power if they want to, generated from their own solar system, all of which is behind the meter and therefore invisible to NESO and not part of the figures we've considered today. Any concern you might be feeling is probably due to the FUD that naysayers are spreading, the fear, uncertainty and doubt, the misinformation being spread, either through ignorance or because there is some benefit to them in delaying the transition, perhaps some profit to be made, or the retention of control over a market or a set of people. No, fear not folks, the maths works out. There are no major issues here. The electricity network is managing very nicely despite the big transition in energy use that is underway. Thanks very much for joining me today. Your questions and comments on this subject are most welcome in the comments section. I'd really like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Does the speed of the growth in the EV fleet surprise you, or is that what you already pictured? Were you aware of the great grid upgrade and the projects that the DNOs were undertaking to get the grid fit for an electric future? Let me have it in the comments section. If you've liked the video, then it is a big help to me if you click the thumbs up button. And I'd love to have you as a subscriber of the channel if you want to see more from me. Thanks.